Hello, everyone. I hope you can see the screen. Here's the outline for today. Problem, question. I'm going to talk a little bit about the motivation. I have a slide of methods, tons of slides of data, but I'm going to go very fast. This is to show you what kind of data I have, and I'm going to spend some time on the delivery. So my project is called, it's a very general title, Knowledge Exchange for Eco-Health Awareness in Maricopa, but I'm going to be talking more about the ecology of mosquitoes and the awareness of the population. Let me see. I need to be able to change my screen if I want to. You see this? Yeah. So this is the problem. Arizona has a huge issue with mosquito-borne viruses, arboviruses they're called. For example, West Nile virus, which was introduced in 2004, is #1 in cases in Arizona. You can see the number of deaths by state. In just 2019, Arizona is on top. This is an eco-health problem because the outcome of health here are associated with ecological dynamics. West Nile virus has to do with the dynamics of birds and mosquitoes. That's the natural cycle of the virus. But sometimes spill over humans and other mammals, causing diseases. We are dead ends, so we don't transmit this kind of diseases, but we suffer from this ecological imbalance. This has to do with land use change and changes in the environment of mosquitoes. So I have 3 questions that I want to answer, or at least try to get on insight on. The most important, if the population is aware of this health risk and the environmental determinant of this risk in their neighborhood. It's a very localized problem. I will talk a little bit about that. But in order to understand question 1, I need to understand more a little bit about the environmental determinant of mosquito risk in Arizona. And the third question is if this awareness of the risk, it's associated with the degree of risk itself. So I need to do some kind of analysis, spatial analysis, associating perception of risk and risk. My motivation for this is that why is that eco-health problem? If you see this image, this is the change in land use change in Arizona since 1984. And it is important to be aware that these changes produce modifications that then have consequences for our health. With a few of researchers, we are trying to understand more about urban governance for this kind of eco-health issues that are dynamics changing. In light of the new agenda for urban governance and health as a primary objective, we say that we need a decision support that not just consider analytical tools like models, like we all see models all day in this time, but we also need to connect this with a coalition that trusts this model and create a sort of engagement with this model. And these coalitions have to be institutions, publics, researchers, and the public. So the methods that I'm following, giving this motivation to understand this question, is to understand more of the determinant of risk in Arizona. I'm going to start with that question before answering number 1. Is that this? I'm going to try to do a spatial and temporal analysis of data from mosquito for Maricopa for 2 species. To understand more about the awareness and the perception of risk of the population, I'm going to try to have a survey to understand risk perception and use some data from previous surveys too. And to understand more about the overlapping between risk and perception, I'm going to try to develop this survey in a way that can then be analyzed with the spatial and temporal analysis of mosquito. So the data I have is entomological observation. From an ecological perspective, I have data from 14 epidemiological districts in all Arizona, Maricopa. The data is divided in epidemiological districts, which are showing here in the blocks, blue blocks. I'm interested in two species, Culex and Anopheles. Culex is the main vector for West Nile virus. Anopheles is an important species because it's a transmission of dengue. That we don't have dengue here. So we have the data from the observation of Anopheles all over the area. We're gonna try to understand more about this data. These are the location of the observation of Anopheles. And we have also the observation for the Culex over a period of more about like 10 years. Although these traps are being replaced and added to the data set over time. So we have to consider those issues too. There's a huge data set, very detailed. Some of these data have to do with epidemiological parameters. For example, we have the number of mosquitoes that tested positive in some of the area that we're gonna try to use to understand more about the determinant of risk. From an environmental perspective, we're gonna use data, the ASU satellite data from a company that ASU is partnered with. It's a very detailed remote sensing data to understand more about the land cover in the valley. With this data, you can obtain some sort of discrimination of different land covers in the valley. And with this land cover, I have been doing a classification, a high resolution classification in having in mind my objective, which is understand about mosquitoes. So many of these categories that I'm classifying using this remote sensing data have to do with important factors that might influence mosquito. We also have climate data and that we want to analyze in time with the data of mosquito. What you see here in red are the traps of mosquito over time. And on top, you have temperatures and rainfall on the bottom. For about 6 years, we have full data of this. The idea of this is to understand and provide information about the ecology of the mosquito. I'm going to go back a little bit when I talk about the deliveries. I'm going to try to connect, thanks to the great presentation we saw on census, try to get some data to define not just risk, but where are the vulnerable populations. For that, I need to know the age of the population, the density, some sort of socioeconomic indicators. I'm going to, an important outcome that I would like to discuss is if the population is aware of risk. I'm going to try to create this survey instrument to understand more about the perception of hazard, the understanding of risk in terms of the factors that influence the risk. And importantly, this survey has to be related to and spatially stratified risk exposure sample. So I want to see if people with more hazard itself perceive more risk. That's what you will expect. I'm going to try to link this information with other instrument that was has been conducted for many years in the valley, which is the CAP LTR survey, which is added to our living in desert. So I'm going to try to see if I can combine those two to understand more about the perception of people living in this desert and the hazards in terms of mosquito. In terms of deliveries, I'm going to try to provide, publish a scientific paper about this, distribution of risk, the determinant of risk as higher spatial resolution, and hopefully I will have some sort of white paper or report about the risk perception and the spatial distribution of risk. I will, let me see. So one of the deliveries that I want to spend some time discussing is a web application to facilitate the exchange of knowledge. So we have all this information, mosquito, data, the ecology of the mosquito. I would like to provide an application that can exchange this knowledge between managers, between researchers and the public. The idea is to generate awareness of the determinant of risk, provide education in terms of ecological dynamics or ecology in general, and STEAM, how to use technology and modeling to understand more about these processes. So I want to talk about also in this tool about urban ecology of and specifically about mosquito. And the idea will be to promote citizen science. Idea that if you create awareness, then people will be more engaged in different projects that are going on in the valley to understand more about these processes. The idea of understand risk is not just from a scientific purpose, but we want to create this tool that can provide this information to the actors in a way that they can then, if this provides some awareness about why are there at risk, on how vulnerable they are, then we can start a new phase of the project, which is when you trust this type of information and you are interested in that, you can provide your own knowledge to more, and they move a very high spatial resolution. That we have might not provide the actual risk that people are facing. So a way that is accessible. I think the same deliverable of the tool will have all these.
We're losing a little bit of your sound, Andres.
Yeah.
We're losing a little bit of your sound. Okay, tell us the so what. Yeah, tell us your so what.
So in the last 30 seconds, I'll tell you what we doing. So the risk of arboviruses and mosquito-borne is shared in a community sense. Just like we share the risk of COVID, here our environmental changes are put us as risk, a very localized scale with your neighbors. And I think that's an important aspect that we need to consider and make people aware of. This risk can be reduced greatly by environmental friendly actions and conscious decision making, that's why we're trying to create this awareness. And this awareness can generate environmental knowledge, which can help authorities, not just the public, to understand more about the risk, but authorities can also gain from resident knowledge to improve estimation and obtain other ecological information. With that, I will give the knowledge to everyone that part of this project and provide feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andres. And I apologize again for interrupting you too prematurely. I do apologize. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to pass it quickly first to Michael to ask his question about the framing, the risk calculation, which follows on really nicely with your last point. Michael?
Yeah, so I think this reminds me of some of the conversation I think we had a couple weeks ago, but I love this idea of looking at perceived versus actual risks. But also interested in, like, you know, what's the risk calculation that you envision that somebody in the Phoenix Valley area is making? You know, are they weighing their lives? Are they weighing their livelihood? What are the threats that they envision? And then because I know we're talking about like the probabilities, but what are the threats? Like what's the possible range of threats that mosquito-borne illness someone might face? And I think it's interesting to think about, you know, all the various kinds of threats that are out there for mosquito-borne illness. I don't know. So I just found this to be like really provoking, and those were some of the kind of feedback that I had. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Uh, my idea for for having this risk function is to use this very localized information that we have about land cover, land use, previous information about where the risk is located, where the epidemics happened before, and combine all that information and provide a risk assessment, spatial explicit, in which you don't have to give me your exact location, but if you tell me where you are, I can calculate what's the proportion of land in certain land cover, what is the data tell me about past abundance of mosquito, and if you tell me other information about yourself, like your age or how many people live there, I can tell you something about not just about the risk, but also about how vulnerable you are. That's the kind of idea.
Okay, great, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you both. Josh and Dowkin also asked a similar question about the urban ecology water regimes. Do you want to go ahead and take that, Joshua?
Yep, thanks. Yeah, so I really liked, Andreas, that you are connecting the sort of climate and environmental dynamic with the epidemiological dynamic of the mosquitoes and the health risks. One thought that I had, that as you were presenting the climate data, I was thinking to myself, you know, what other sort of human introduced water regimes, Patricia, thank you, that was a nice framing, also have the kinds of impact that the climate regimes have, and would that be an important characteristic to model in your project?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, actually, I've been talking a lot about behavior and conscious behavior, and one of those, the most important one, is the use of water, which I didn't mention here. But managing your regime of water individually can have great impacts on the mosquitoes, actually, that are around. They're very sensitive. They're just sensor. They sense temperature, they sense water, and they sense your and all those things can be also censored by remote sensing and other tools that we have available. But the behavior part and how people use their environment, very localized, that's the missing part, and I think that's the next link. But for that, I need to first understand what is the risk to tell something, and what are the perception of this risk, and create this trust of the data. Maybe our estimation are not gonna be correct. We're gonna have a lot of error, but as we have seen recently, we need to be clear about those errors, about these uncertainties that we have, and that we need help from the community to improve.
Very good. Thank you so much, Andres. Really appreciate. I appreciate you going first as well. So anybody else who has other questions, please connect directly, and you can also use the private chat to follow up on little things. I really appreciate that, and looking forward to seeing this. I think you've got also an interesting model as a deliverable, as well as just the ones that you've listed and the outcomes of the work. You know, the model itself, to be able to be thinking about how you apply this to other subjects is really, I think, going to be a really important contribution. So thank you.